Yo, assalamu alaikum guys. So I actually have a better mic right now. So basically in the debate with Noism, like a lot of people basically just confuse what I said as like moral rigid decimator or modal rigid decimator. No, I said modal rigid decimator, basically as a necessary being. So I don't believe anybody understood my argumentation, so I'm here to say what I was trying to say, and I don't really believe I won the point. I just believe it was kind of in con because like there wasn't really a direct attack to what I said. And they claimed I went circular because they said you need God for that. I said no. Basically, just the universes are just like the mortal worlds are just contingent upon God, and if God is a necessary being for each of these worlds, you cannot have a conceivable world which has this doesn't have God. So basically, if that's the case, then basically it's just a contradiction to say that there isn't really an existent God. So I understand. No one's put into question my stance about God and etc. But this was the justification for basically God existing. That basically these mortal worlds basically have God in them as a necessary being. So if we take this set of mortal worlds or all mortal worlds and we claim God does exist in this point as a necessary being, then it's justified that he does exist basically by being the necessary being, which substantiates this. I didn't directly or just give a definition to what God was, or basically just like I guess you could say I kind of went circular by saying like you still need God as the utility or the mere logical utility for the set of possible worlds and etc. But at the same time, if God is going to be the necessary world by a categorizing of the S5 axiom, if we use an X5 axiom, then basically by that he would just be a necessity towards that and must exist within each one. He's a modal axiom towards that, and when we apply that the S5 scope, it's like accessible. It's an accessible relationship between each world. So in that case, I was basically claiming that God is the necessity and he exists as a modal axiom towards these worlds to balance in that case. I could just say, or like, there wasn't an implication as what I consider as God. I just said I'm a theist, so I believe he does exist, so that would just imply ontological reality. But in the sense of like a, point about the, conclusions, he said that doesn't change anything. Just said that went circular. So if that's the case, God can exist as like a conception. It's just basically that God, even then in conception, etc., is still the necessary thing you need for these worlds because it's part of the proposition which conceives a framework. And that point, the truth maker is just that God, the belief and etc. does exist, or it wasn't directly implied, so you can call equivocation fallacy on my end, but in that point, he's just presupposing or just like getting like a rough idea what I mean, but like in the modal sense of God existing. So I guess you could say he's going off by presupposition by claiming that you need God for that. But like, okay, and I need God, right? So I gave God towards that set of mortal worlds. If that's the case, that we need God, then obviously God is the necessity towards that. We can't reject God in that case. Otherwise, it's a contradiction, logically inconsistent world. So that basically just justifies God's existence because God is the necessity towards the set of possible worlds, or all possible worlds in that case. It's a universal thing. So in that sense, yeah, you can't really claim God doesn't exist. And yes, God can be used as utility, even though you're proving something with it. Like even if you do claim it's like circular, that's like also just saying I use the Bible to prove it's the Bible, therefore it's circular. Even though existence is like an intransitive thing, um, yeah, it's not like a direct thing towards. So I just use the existence of God to prove the existence of God. In that point, I just said that you cannot have any other world without God. God is the necessity towards that, if that's the case. God serves as a necessary being and serves as the grounding for all these worlds. Otherwise, it's basically a modal collapse argument. Just in that case, you can't have God, without God, because otherwise that's a contradiction. If you claim God is God, but then say, well, or rather, the substance isn't God in that case, then basically that's a contradiction. You still need God for that. That's like saying I went circular to prove an identity is an identity, even though it's like fucking identical to itself. The world is identical to itself, is it not? In that case, necessary being is included within that set of worlds, therefore identical within that set. So you need that specific conditional to even achieve identity or, an identical process. It's how that functions. Because it just grants logical inconsistencies. So if that necessary world needs God to exist, then yes, it's going to need God to exist. That's why I said it's essential for God to exist, because God is conceived within these states of affairs. And if we disclude him, then basically that's a contradiction. We can't allow that within actual classical deduction of modal logic. The conveyance being that God is the mere logical utility to prove his intransitive state. Basically, and that's like essential thing when we understand. God must be God must be there then. If it is the case that he's necessary for these things, which via the proposition under an S5 thing, to conceive them, in that case you needed like the fucking modal axiom that he is God, etc. You could say that's circular, but no, it's just mere logical utility. Anyways, see ya.